Dr. Mallon, thank you very much for joining us on Now We're Talking TV.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you for having me.
Just how important is telecommunications for Australia's low-carbon future?
High-speed broadband is really coming along, if you like, in tandem with the pressures on governments and society to reduce carbon emissions. And in a way that's fortuitous. High-speed broadband starts to open up many opportunities which were simply not available. And it's interesting because it also, in the industry, this is described as a disruptive incubation. What it means is that you have a innovation which wasn't there before, but can fundamentally change the whole market around it in ways that people perhaps were not expecting. So a classic example would be, say, the fax machine, which changed, if you like, mail, and then the email, which made fax machines redundant. In the same way, I think we'll see high-speed broadband making certain things in the wider society redundant. So a very good example of the use of high-speed broadband would be in the area of travel. When people travel, they go for a human experience. They go because there are subtleties of interaction which you can't get over a telephone, which you can't even quite get over video links perhaps on your laptop, because there are subtleties of expression or gesture or mood that are lost. One of the things that we're seeing in the new generation of telecommuting, which is the high-speed, large, high-definition systems, is they are able to capture those nuances. They're actually able to capture, if you like, the 60% of communication which is non-verbal. And when people see those systems, and certainly we've been interacting with people around this area, we're seeing that it is a step change in functionality, which means that people then say, I don't need to travel because I can have the same experience without ever leaving my office or ever leaving my city or leaving my country.
At the moment, those sort of facilities are available to big business, the top end of town. How do you see in the next sort of 5, 10, 15 years sort of opportunities for small business, people in their homes? What sort of technology and what sort of things are going to happen to benefit them?
Look, let's take a step into the future, perhaps, and think about how that might be used. Imagine I'm in a small business. Okay, I've got a small office, just like any small, medium-sized business might have today. I have, I have my computers, I have my staff working, and I'm potentially pitching to a new client. That client, instead of being in, say, Sydney, is in New York. Okay, now if I'm a small business, for me to send a senior staff member across to New York, it's a day's travel time there. The person has arriving jet lagged. They've then got to make a pitch, and then they've got to get themselves back or have some following meetings. I've lost a week of someone's time in a small business, which costs an awful lot of money, and also, as well as the travel costs, or possibly the carbon costs as well. Imagine that I'm able to walk down the street into just a serviced office or a telecoms company who have a suite that I can hire by the hour. Sure, I can pay for it. It might even be relatively costly for what might be a telephone call, but you can imagine that's saving almost a week of someone's time, an inordinate amount of cost on travel. So you can imagine that you have so much more ability for not just the big companies, but the small companies to be using these services in a real-time, day after day environment. And obviously it opens up an awful lot of commercial opportunity, which just simply isn't there at the moment.
So when we see that sort of adoption happening across small, medium and large businesses, what's that impact on our low-carbon future?
Look, our estimations are that we think around 50% of business travel, well, roughly 50. You could say 50% of travel is for business travel in typical typical markets, not just Australia, but also in Europe or the US. Now the question is, how much of that could be avoided? Conservatively, you could say that a third of that travel could be avoided, as in people will still want to meet face-to-face to close a deal, yeah? They'll still want to meet face-to-face to sign contracts or to resolve very difficult issues, but there's a huge amount of that interaction which can simply be shifted into, if you like, shifted into an online environment without any loss of functionality, and quite frankly, you're more likely to get more meetings with distant clients because they're only losing an hour of their time instead of a day of their time. So it's not just that you're replacing, you're potentially increasing functionality and increasing the efficiency of those relationships.
So at the same time, reducing pressures on, as you say, travel, cars, planes?
Absolutely. Well, certainly the aviation sector is a major source of current emissions, and it is growing very, very rapidly. The problem with the aviation sector per se is that there are very few alternatives. Planes are naturally efficient. They have very efficient engines, they have very efficient, they're very efficient devices. You can't squeeze much more out of a plane than is already being squeezed out. So what do? Really, this is where you see something quite novel coming along, which is instead of saying, well, let's make a more efficient plane or try and run it on renewable energy, you can say, let's look at this a completely different way. Why do people get into planes? And can we find an alternative which is much, if you like, avoids all of those carbon emissions going up?
Let's future gaze. We've got our high-speed National Broadband Network. It's been in place for a while. We have the technologies developed. What's that mean? What's it going to look like practically for Australia and its low-carbon future?
At the moment, we have what I would call object-focused energy, which is that we have things around the house or around the office which are, they get the energy that they want. So if I turn the TV on, the TV sits there sucking the energy, and even if I go out of the room, even if I leave the house for the whole day, that TV sits there, sorry. The same for air conditioning systems, the same for hot water systems. All of these objects sit drawing energy, causing significant amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, whether the person there is not, whether they're being used or not. Imagine a world where we have person-focused energy, which is the TV only needs to be on if I'm there. The computer only needs to be on if I'm there. The lights, the air conditioning only need to be on if I'm there. So imagine when I leave the room, it all shuts down. When I enter the room, what I need comes back on. The energy follows me, not the object. Now, that is potentially a huge savings in emissions and in energy consumption, because it's energy when you need it, not when you don't. And that's where we could see this intelligence that is enabled by networks and so on really being harnessed to make our use of energy much more focused and much more efficient.
So, Doctor, you're an expert in climate change. Why is telecommunications so important?
When we started this work, we started to realise that this particular sector, the telecommunications sector, had the potential to have a major impact on climate change emissions. And the reason is that what we see is a ubiquity in the access of this particular industry to offices, to homes, to people. Essentially, this particular sector reaches into every single building in the country, and it almost reaches every single person. So if you can deliver climate change or emission reduction opportunities, even if they're small, if you can deliver that across 20 million people, or the millions of homes that are in the country, the thousands of offices, and create even small changes in every one of those buildings, that adds up to a colossal impact on national emissions. That's why it's so important.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on Now We're Talking Television.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you for having me.